Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. This is lesson 2, primitive types. In this lesson we will be going over classes, main methods, print commands, comments, data types, operators, primitive variables versus object variables, final data types, variable naming, import statements, the scanner class, integer division, and casting. So let's get started. So as I had mentioned in the previous video, you can code on 2 platforms. I will be using BlueJ, but you can also go on to jdoodle.com. So if you're using BlueJ, let's go click on the BlueJ app. BlueJ downloaded, you can go to the previous lesson and you can get it downloaded following the instructions using that website. And we're going to create a new project. I'm just going to name this test. You can copy along with me as we will be coding together. And I am just going to choose to save it on my desktop right over here. Right? And we're going to click OK. So now that we have created a new project, we would want to create a new class, since everything in Java is coded within a class. I will name this class lesson _2. You don't want to have any spaces within classes because Java will recognize those words as different statements. Spaces in Java really do matter. The same with casing as well. So we're going to want to open our editor. And all of this is unnecessary, so what you want to do is highlight everything and delete. So this is the Rosetta Stone of Java. When you're first starting off, you're going to want to memorize this. But as we get into later lessons, we'll start to understand the structure of the syntax we're using right now. But for now, we're just going to memorize it. So public class, and our class up here is lesson _2. And then we're going to want to use brackets to indicate what our class encompasses. So our class will encompass everything from here to here. So inside our class, we're going to need a main method. And essentially what a main method is the method you're going to call, and that is what's going to execute everything. So you're going to want to memorize the syntax for the main method as well. It's public static void main, and you're going to have a parentheses, string, and you're going to want to put 2 of these brackets. So here's the left bracket and the right bracket, and we're just going to name it args right there. And we're also going to want to bracket this to see what this encompasses. So now that we have our main method and class set up, we're going to start our code right over here within this main method. So as I had mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, we will be first going over print commands. And so the syntax for print commands, there are 2 types. So the first type I'll go over is system.out.print. You're going to want to memorize this syntax. It's the most common syntax in Java for printing. And let's say, what do we want to print? Let's say we just want to print the word cat. And when you are wanting to print some sort of string, then you're going to want to have these quotations over here to indicate that this is what you want printed. And in Java, you know how in English we have periods to indicate the end of a sentence. In Java, we use semicolons. And then what we're going to want to do is compile. You just hit this compile button over here, and it shows that we don't have any errors in terms of syntax. So that's the great thing about these online compilers and developmental compilers. We can check to see if there's something wrong with our syntax. Since we're good, we're going to go over here. We're going to right click on this, and we're going to want to hit void main string args. That's our main method. So when we click this, it's just going to run what was inside our main method. So when we void it, we're just going to want to hit OK. and it printed cat, what we had wanted. And notice how it didn't print these quotations over here. If for some reason you want quotations to print, there is a special casing you do for that. So what you want to do is the backslash. That is our key thing over here. You're going to want to hit this backslash and then put quotations. That basically will tell you, all right, this is a backslash, so that means there's something upcoming that we want to print. So we'll compile this as well. We have no errors. And what you want to do with your terminal over here, that's what we call this place, the terminal or console. And we're just going to want to go to options and clear it out so that we have a clean slate for when we void our method again. So void main string args. And there you go. We have the quotations over here. Now you may also be wondering, wait, if the backslash is not printed over here, how do we get the backslash to print? So the way how you get backslashes to print is you just put two of them and it's just going to print one. And so we're going to want to run our method again. And we have our backslash over here. So you're going to want to memorize a couple of these conventions when we are talking in terms of strings. Because to bracket out a string, you need quotations. And then there are the special cases with the backslash, but then Java needs the backslash to indicate what you're going to print as well. So let's just clear this out. And we talked about print. So now let me tell you something. Say we do system.out.print again, and let's say we want to print dog. Oops, I made a mistake over here. We're going to need these in quotations. Oops, so I have a syntax error. So this is what it does when you have a syntax error, it indicates, and let's click on this. Oh, so it does not recognize system or whatever I spelled. I misspelled system incorrectly. So what I'm going to want to do is correct the casing or run the compiler again, and we're good on errors. See, so that's a good thing about compilers. They direct you to exactly where you made the error and tell you why the error is there. So you may think, all right, I have this over here, and in the next line I have this over here. So it should print cat dog like this. You should have cat on top and dog should be printed underneath it. Let's see what it does. That's weird. I wanted it to come underneath. Why did it happen like that? So that's the thing about the print command. Whenever you print, it's just going to keep going on the same line, because it's like you have your cursor. So it's originally over here, it's going to print out cat. The cursor didn't go down to the next line, it stopped over here. So whenever you call another print command, it's just going to keep going like that. So how do we get it to go down to the next line? Well, I'll tell you, there are two ways to do it. The first way I'll go over is another backslash command, and what you're going to do is \n, and that just basically stands for new line. So it's just going to put this statement on an entirely new line. So we'll compile it, it's all good, and I'm going to want to clear this out just to avoid any confusion, and let's run the main method again. Well, there you go, you have them on two separate lines. There's another common backslash command that you should also know, which is the tab one. So like when we hit tab, the cursor is just going to go over there, like a given space. But in Java, how we do that is we do \t. So now let's see how it works. And there you go. You have the tab. It's not a space. It's just the spacing you get from when you hit like tab in Word. So we're going to want to clear that out. The second way to go on a new line is the second version of the print command, system.out.println. Personally, this is my favorite because I like everything to be organized in line down fashion. So system.out.println, that's essentially what that's going to do is it's going to start the cursor at the beginning, but then you know how system.out.print, it just kept going. What essentially this is going to do is it's going to move the cursor down to the next line. So that's what this ln stands for, line. So whenever we do system.out.println, it'll print cat, and then it'll print dog underneath it. We can have print or println, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to put println to maintain consistency. And this is all cleared out. So we'll just void it. And there you go. So that's all you need to know about print commands. And you'll learn more about the backslashes and all of that when we get into strings, because essentially what you're printing out here is a string. So now that we're through with print commands, we are going to go on into our next lesson, which is about comments. So the way how you do comments in Java is if you just want to put a comment, because Java recognizes everything that you put into here as code. So the way for it to not throw you out error, say I want to define this, I want to indicate that this is the main method, just for personal reference. So what you're going to do is / 2 times. All right. And now you're in common territory, so you can just say this is the main method. Period. So that's all you do. Now whenever you go on to the next line, it's going to see if you try to do this. This is the main method, just for your personal reference. It's going to cause an error over here because it does not recognize this as code. But whenever you put it in comments, it doesn't recognize that code. It's just for the user. So then there's another way. Say I want to say, how do I get comments to come out, but I want to put it on normal lines? Well, you could do this way. This is that is very tedious and just not efficient at all. So there is a way where you can do it across multiple lines. You're going to want to hit / and then you're going to want to hit the star above the 8. So you have that, and then there you go. You just hit enter and it automatically set that up for you. And then you can go, this is the, see, all I'm doing is just hitting enter and it automatically puts the star, main method. So that is a much more efficient way if you need to do it across multiple lines. All right, now that we are through with commas, I am going to go into data types. And essentially what I mean by data types are variables. So there are different types of variables in Java. So you have primitive variables and object variables. This difference between the two is that primitive variables stores the actual value of the object inside the variable. An object, which we will get later into whenever we get into the object lesson, basically holds directions to the object that you actually have. So it doesn't actually store value, it just stores directions to it. So if you try to print an object variable, it's just going to print the memory address, which basically holds the directions to the actual object, because Java does not have enough space to store it within one place. It has to take you to an entirely different place. But we'll get into that whenever we get into the object class. But essentially what you need to know about the primitive variables is that the value that you enter is stored within that variable. So the most common type of variable that we use in Java is integers. And you may be asking, what is integers? Essentially, it's the same thing you do in math. You have integers, which are all values negative, 0, and all positive values. So you're going to want to hit int. That's how you indicate that we're doing an integer variable. And this is where we get into variable naming. You want to use meaningful names so that you know what you're referencing. And the way how we're going to name variables is through camel case. So say I want to name this data order. I'm not just going to type data order, because like I said about originally, Java recognized these as two different statements because of spaces. So we don't want any spaces. Now that would be a good thing, but then you're not able to tell how do I have differentiate between these two words, order and data. Well, this is where camel case comes into play. We just capitalize the first letter of the variable. And whenever we're naming variables, we always want the first character to be lowercase. And you don't want to name any variable starting with numbers, like go like that, one data low. You don't want to do this. But you can add numbers in any part of the variable other than the first character. And you don't want to put any quotations in variable naming as well. So you don't want to go like that as well. So now that we have int, now data order is the name of our variable. And what value do we want to set this at? Let's just go with a simple number of 5. So we have 5 over here, and we'll compile. It's great. So now 5 is stored within the variable data order. So now what we're going to want to do is print it just to see if everything is functioning properly. So like I had mentioned before, system.out.println, and we don't have to put any quotations because we're putting in something that Java already recognizes, which is the variable that we named. See, you can do that. And it won't print the actual word data order. It'll print whatever is within our variable data order. If we wanted to print the actual word data order, we'd put quotations. But since we just want to print whatever is inside, we don't need these quotations. So we'll clear out the terminal, compile, and run the main method. See, it printed out 5, whatever was within it. So now let's see. So now that we've talked about ints, we can also do like -1. That will also work. Here, print that out for you as well. All right, great. So now that we've gone over integer variables, the next important type you may be wondering is double. And what double means is in integers, you're not able to put in any rational numbers such as decimals or fractions. But within doubles, we can input all of that. So we have double data order. You want to use the proper variable naming techniques. And let's just say 5.5. Oops, I forgot to put my equal sign. Now you may be wondering, I forgot to mention this, what this equal sign means. It is basically an assignment. It's not saying data order is equal to 5.5. It's assigning it. It's saying data order, we're setting the value of data order to 5.5. So now, oops, I forgot to put my semicolon. Again, that's the period in Java. We'll void it. And it printed out 5.5. Now you may be wondering, what if we just put this inside an int variable? It's going to actually end up throwing us an error in the compiler because we can't have rational numbers in integer variable types, so we need double. And we can also have negative values as well that will compile as well. Now, what I had mentioned before is strings. So you've already had experience with strings when we were in the print statements. So let's say I have data order, and again assigning it, and we need these quotations. We use the same techniques what we used over here when our print statement. So let's just say hi. Again, we want our semicolon, and what this will do is print hi. There you go. And again, the whole backslash thing, that also applies here, because what we were basically doing down here is entering in strings when I had first started talking about print statements. But here, we can actually store it within a variable. So now you may be wondering, all right, how do I indicate whether something is true or false? Well, we have something for that as well. You can use strings, but that is very inefficient. Boolean is the type you use for indicating whether something is true or false. So Boolean data order equals true. And Java will recognize it because it's not a string, it's just seeing whether a statement is true or false. If you try entering in anything else, it'll throw you an error. And then the other statement that works is false. And I can run that for you as well. And it prints false as well. We'll clear out the terminal. And now that we have talked about Boolean, all types of data types, and we've talked about the assignment operator, which was equals, and again, what that means is data order is set to the value of false. And we have talked about primitive variables and object variables, and how object variables hold the directions to an object of a class. An object is essentially just an instance of a class, but I'll get to that in the object lesson. And another important thing we need to know is final data types. Essentially, the way how we do final data types is by putting just final at the beginning. Now you may be wondering, what does this final keyword mean? It basically means that this is a constant. So we cannot go over here and change the variable to just true. Oops, misspelled it. True. It won't allow us to do that because it's final. But whenever it's not, and final means it's a constant, which means this variable, once it's declared and initialized, it cannot be changed. So say we want to change this variable, we'll just have to remove the final word, and we can do that. And again, this is an assignment operator, which is basically setting data order to true. Down here, we don't need the Boolean statement again because we've already declared the variable up here. This is just an assignment, so we're just initializing it again over here. So now that we have talked about all of that, we've talked about variable. Oh yeah, there's one more thing you should know about variable naming. You cannot have keywords. So like final was a keyword. Hold on, let's just make this true. When we're doing naming, I cannot just name, say I want to name something final, I can't name this, the variable final, because it's a keyword. That's another thing about Java, because it'll recognize it as the keyword and not the actual variable name that you wanted. So you can't do that. So we'll have that. And say we didn't have this statement over here, it's going to cause an error because it's saying, where's data order? I don't have a variable named data order. So we'll just go like that. And you can do this. This is just going to give you, move the, again, the cursor to the next line. Okay, the next important thing we need to talk about is import statements. So let's say, so the way how we do import statement is first you're going to type import, that's another keyword. And there are some things that you cannot, there are some classes that are not implemented within Java but have been developed by third parties, and we'd like to use them as well because they just make life a whole lot easier. Such as you may be wondering, all right, we're able to print stuff onto this terminal, but how do we actually give the computer an input? Like say I wanted to type in 5 and I wanted it to return what I inputted. Well, the way how we do that is using something called the scanner class. So scanner, but we cannot use the scanner class until we import it. So the way how we import it is java.util.scanner. So you're going to want to memorize this statement as well. And now we can use the scanner class. So again, scanner is a type, and this is an object. So the way how we declare objects is different than how we declare primitive variable types. So say I want to name this variable scan. So it's the same syntax so far. Scanner is the type, and scan is the variable name. And we have our assignment operator as well. But here is where the difference comes. We're going to want to type in new, because we're saying this is a new object of the scanner class. And we imported the scanner class with this statement up here. And you're going to want to say it's a new scanner object. And we need a parameter system.in. You're going to want to memorize this statement for now until we understand how it works. And I'll go over that in the object class again. So, because we're using, this is an object. Scan is a scanner object. So now that we have this over here, let's say, all right, I want to get an input from the user now. So there are 3 important statements that you should know. Scan.nextInt, scan.nextDouble, scan.nextLine, and scan.next. So scan.nextInt, this is just basically going to go over to the computer. It's whenever we do an input, it's going to want to only recognize an int. So say you enter in like cat whenever the input comes up, it's going to throw an error because it's not an integer. So whenever we put scan.nextInt, we're only going to be able to recognize integers. So that's 5. So if we enter in 5, it'll work. Doubled, same thing, so it'll only recognize doubles. Line, that's when you actually start recognizing strings, and it'll actually go over here and move down the cursor. This is like your system.out.println. You get the entire statement in the line. Next, Next just takes in the current string. So if you put cat space dog and you call scan.next, it's only going to take in cat. It's not going to take in the full statement. The way how you want to get the full statement is use scan.next line. That's why I don't prefer to use this. So these are your three important statements. So say I wanted to get the user, and we want to store this in a variable, because if you just take it and then throw it away, what's the use of it? So let's just say test again, and this is assignment operator, and it'll basically be assigned to whatever the user enters in. And then what I just want to do is print that back to them. So I'll just print whatever they inputted back to them to see if it's working properly. We'll compile. We have a clear terminal. So void, and see, we just put in an input. So I'll show you, for example, what happens if I enter in a string. Cat, enter. See, that just throws me an error. It's called input mismatch exception. That's because we were expecting an integer to come in, but we saw a string come in, so it didn't recognize it, and it threw us an error and shut down the code. So now let's try it again with an actual integer, and that's the input right over here. That's what it means by whatever's in blue, and 5 is what was printed back. It immediately printed back whatever we printed. So whatever we inputted, I'm sorry. So let's say if we have a string, we do next line, and I want to print back whatever's given. So we'll compile. So we can enter in 5, but it will print it out as a string, not as an integer. You can still do it. Strings are very flexible because you can enter in any character and it'll recognize it, because that's just what it is. But let's say we want to just enter in any word, cat, it'll successfully print it out because we inputted a string and we expected a string to come as well. So that's essentially how the scanner class works. And again, you can do next double as well, the statement that I had mentioned. So now the next thing that we're going to talk about is operators. And I don't need this import statement anymore because we're not using the scanner class anymore. So yeah, I can get rid of this as well. We don't need any of this. We're back to our main method. And so operators. So if you start wondering about, all right, how do I get math to work? So I want to do math in Java. Well, Java kind of acts as your calculator. So int test equals, let's say we want to do some math. 5 plus 5. Java can recognize this because it just goes through and sees, all right, this is a mathematical operation. We can easily calculate that and print that out. So let's take a guess what we're going to print, and I think it's going to be 10. So, oops, I didn't print it out. Gotta always print out the statement if you want to see what's going on. So, try that again. There you go, it printed out 10. Now if you do something like 5 plus a string or something, of course that's going to throw you an error right there when you try to compile. But yeah, you can do 5 plus 5. Oops. So you can do that for anything. And say you try to do 5.5 plus 5.5. That won't work either because you're trying to add a double to an integer. Because integers can only take in integers and not actual rational numbers. But say I just change this to a double, it'll print that out as a double as well when we print it out. 10.5 right there. And we can enter integers into double. Double is just basically a stronger version of integer because we can put in anything. You don't have to do something like 5.0 for it to work. You can just put in 5 like that. And say there was one other thing I forgot to mention about doubles. Say we do double test equals 5. What do you think it's going to print? 5? Well, that's where we're wrong. It's actually going to print 5.0 because you entered in an integer, but it turned it into a double. So what it printed back out to us was a double. So the 5.0 is actually recognized as double, but you can enter integers into double as well. So we've talked about plus, The same thing happens with minus. You can do the same thing with minus. Same thing with division. And for multiplication, we use the star, all right? And there's one thing I should probably mention about division. So let's see. Int test, and we're going to do something 5 divided by 3. No, let's do something more simple. 5 divided by 2. What do you think that's going to print out? 2.5? It's the most logical thing. But that's where Java is weird. It's actually going to print out 2. Because this is what's called integer division. Whenever you do 5, remember, integers, you cannot store actual doubles. You cannot store in rational numbers. So this integer can't store in the value of 2.5. So it's just going to store whatever it recognizes, and 2.5, it's just going to basically chop off the decimals and just print whatever integer it has, and what it had was just 2. So then you may be wondering, how do I get 2.5? Well, you're just going to have to make this into a double right there. And you may be wondering, all right, this should print out 2.5, definitely, right? It's actually going to print out 2.0. The reason for that is because you're doing 5 divided by 2. Those are 2 integers. You're doing 2 integers. So what this is actually going to do is have 2, because we have integer division again. And then the double, again, it just changes it into a double, so it's just going to put a .o at the end just to make it rational. So you may be wondering, how do I actually get it to 2.5? Well, you have to have it as a double, and then you have to make one of these a double as well. That should make it 2.5. You can also do it the other way. You can make this a double as well, and that should print out 2.5 as well. So now that we've talked about integer division, we have to talk about the modulus command. And essentially, what modulus means, I like to use a different term, the remainder operation. So we'll use an int. So 5 remainder 5. So essentially what this statement is going to do, it's going to do 5 divided by 5 and print out the remainder. So say if we had like 6, then what it's going to do is do 5 divided by 6, and whenever we do 5 divided by 6, the answer is going to come out as 0, and then it has a remainder of 5. So what's going to be stored within test is 5. So whenever we print out test over here, with that, we will get 5, because that was the remainder of 5 divided by 6. So that's essentially what the modulus command does. And you can do that within doubles and integers. It works both ways. So now that we've talked about the modulus operator, let's get into something else. So we have int test, let's say, equals 5. And test equals test plus 1. What is this going to do? Well, we have the variable test. The assignment operator equals test. Okay, so what was inside our test? That's 5 plus 1. So essentially what this is going to do is make this 6, which is basically incrementing our test variable by a value of 1. So you can do this statement to make it go up by 1 as well, but there is a much more efficient way in Java to do that. You can do test plus plus. That will also increment our value, whatever is in test, by 1. Here, let's try it out. 6, here we go. Now the same thing works for subtraction as well. We can do test equals test minus 1, which is going to just decrease this value to 4, or we can just do test minus minus. Whoops, clear. 4 right there, and say we just do it again. So the current value of test is 4. Whoops. It'll just we'll decrease it by 1 again, and it will go down to 3. See, that's not too bad. But the same thing doesn't work. But I wouldn't recommend using that for multiplication and division. That's just going to make everything confusion. So now that we've talked about integer division rules, there is one last thing we should talk about before we end today out. It's called casting. So say I have a double variable, let's say test equals 7.5. I want to make this into an integer. So how do we do that? So we have int, we're going to name this data order again. And we can cast it, we do this, and we need to have it in parentheses because we are casting the entire statement, and I just want to cast test to a integer. So essentially what it's going to do is the same thing what integer division did. It's just basically going to chop off whatever's at the end of this. So the rounding rules do not apply. Whoops, sorry. Rounding rules do not apply. So 7.6, it's going to be chopped off to 7. 7.9, it's going to be chopped off to 7. 7.1, it's still going to be chopped off to 7. So, show you what it does. Just for verification. Whoops, I printed out the double. I have to actually print out data order. And here we go, 7 right here. So the same thing can also work for doubles. So say I want to cast this to a double, but this won't work. We need to make this a double, and we'll make this an int, and we can't have rationals, so we'll just make that 7. What do you think it's going to do? Like I said before, when casting it to a double, it's just going to put a 0.0, just make it rational. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's lessons. Again, if you have any questions about any of the content that was discussed during this lesson, please scroll down to the bottom of the page of the computer science series, and you can set up a tutoring time. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.